Beer Edge is excited to announce a partnership with Pro Brewer that will bring original articles to probrewer.com twice a week, covering issues important to the beer industry and aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand different facets of the business. Check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and Thursday, and visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. Lagers get a lot of love at Human Robot Brewing in Pennsylvania, and I'm talking with head brewer Andrew Foss about the brewery's approach and expansion. But first, make sure to check out NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz, where you can find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZHops Ltd to learn more. So a few weeks ago, I was in Rochester, New York, judging at the New York State Beer Competition. And on the last day of judging, my pal, Lew Bryson, walked into the room wearing a shirt that asked, "Got Milktubes?" It was from Human Robot, a Philadelphia brewery that has leaned hard on its love of lagers. When the brewery opened 2 years ago in the site of the former St. Benjamin Brewing, it didn't really get the full splash that it deserved due to the pandemic. But over the last 2 years, it has slowly built a strong, loyal, local, and vocal fan base that stop by for beers and that are quick to bend the ear of any beer enthusiast that'll listen. Growth is coming quickly to this brewery, as you'll hear from head brewer Andrew Foss. We spoke after the company opened its second location, and Foss is going to be heading up brewing at both, focusing on lagers, kettle sours, and juicy IPAs. So let's get into the beer and hear what's happening with this brewery in the city of brotherly love. Here's our conversation. Like so many things in the pandemic, I have missed travel, and Philly is relatively close to where I live, but I would get down there often, but it's now been, closing in on about 2 years since I was last down there. Have you noticed any shift in drinker habits, the way you've approached beer, or even just the way that Philly has been beer drinking wise during the pandemic that stands out to you?
Main thing is probably what a lot of other people have noticed, which is just a huge shift to package for small breweries. I know that larger breweries probably have a way higher ratio of, cans and bottles to draft than a typical craft brewery, but we're running about 75% cans right now. And that's doing pretty good business in the front, which we didn't expect at all when we opened in February 2020. And, we didn't think we'd be buying a canning line or anything like that.
What's moving fastest in cans for you guys? Where's the demand?
For us, it's generally our German Pilsner and whatever sort of dry hop Pilsner that we have at the moment are usually the two biggest sellers. And then probably close behind that would be the 10 Plato Czech lager.
I've often thought of Philly. I mean, I guess it's true no matter where you go, but Philly as a lager and Pilsner loving town. Probably that has to do with Yuengling being as prevalent as it was, but I also think of, like Victory and Prima Pils and some of the other, early craft entries that really made good inroads. Is Philly a Pilsner town? Is it a lager town?
I don't know. It seems that way from where I'm sitting right now. But as far as, craft production, I think it's kind of funny because I always thought of Philly as like a Belgian beer enthusiast town, but that really just died 5 or 6 years ago. But it had such a stronghold that
is that the Monk's influence?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, Tom started bringing beer over in the 80s,
Yeah.
So that was, when I moved to Philly, which was early 2000s, even a lot of small craft breweries were doing a lot of Belgian stuff. And a lot of places, the Iron Hill chains and places like that were winning a lot of GABF awards for Belgian styles. So that was really big down here for a long time. And the shift to lager has been pretty hard. But like I said, that's a lot from where I'm sitting. We're a lager heavy brewery. There's certainly a ton of, IPA houses kicking around here too.
When you made the decision to be a lager heavy brewery, what was that born out of?
Well, for me, as a brewer, I have a lot more experience brewing lager than probably equal experience to brewing anything else. Certainly IPAs and stuff like that. If you took every other style I ever brewed combined, the lager styles would make up half of that at least, which I think is unique for a pub. Well, I'm essentially a pub brewer for a long time. And I just sort of think that we were in the right time, right place. And, people came in and the lagers were working out. We didn't really set out to do it this way. We sort of set out I thought I would have maybe 2 lines of lager and, 8 to 10, hazy beers, fruit beers. And thankfully people came in here and drank a lot of clean beer. And, that's really my passion to make. So it's worked out nicely that way. But we certainly didn't set out saying, oh, we're going to be the lager kings or whatever. It was just kind of born out of what people came in here and sat down and drank.
I mean, what were you originally trying to push to be?
Well, we didn't really have that specific of a thing, but the human robot name has sort of bred brewing styles that are very disparate, so we have a 10 Plato Czech lager, is something we always have all the time. And then, we're not really haze beer naysayers. I probably was in, 2016, but so we were trying to just said, hey, I want to just do, really the best lager I can do. And, then we'll try to make the best hazy IPA it can do, because I haven't made a lot of hazy IPA in my career before this. And Jake and Chris, 2 of the partners, both had some experience on the hot side. And Chris certainly was able to steer me in the right direction as far as hopping rates that I just wasn't comfortable with at that point,
What were the rates? Like where did you start to get twitchy as a brewer, hopping rate wise?
3+ pounds per barrel on the cold side is a lot. And it took a little convincing for me, because you really hit that diminishing return point, somewhere just below 2 pounds per barrel, in my opinion. But to get that real saturated hop flavor, we're generally right around 3. Some of the beers probably have 4 to 4.5 on the dry hop side, but it's just not the amount of hops I was used to using.
I've been hearing a little bit more about diminishing returns. It's a conversation that comes up now with brewers who I think are, one, looking at the bottom line, but 2, the pounds per barrel that was so interesting to a lot of drinkers has now sort of become commonplace, I guess. Where you used to say, 10 pounds per barrel, and people, oh wow, that's amazing. And now it doesn't really seem that that's factoring into the conversations all that much. When you're tasting a beer, when you're building on a recipe and you're thinking about that 2 pound mark, even if you are going up to 3 or 4, what do you notice flavor or aroma wise
when you push beyond that point?
Yeah.
I really notice more than anything, like mouthfeel. I don't know that can be quantified exactly. But that's sort of, you can have beers finish anywhere from 3.5 to like 6 Plato, speaking of for hazy IPAs.
Yeah.
And I don't really notice a big difference in the mouthfeel between a 3.5 Plato beer and a 6 Plato beer, with carbonation and everything else. But when you push the dry hop levels, I think that there's just something going on there that, just suspends, and you get that soft feel that you just can't quite get another way. At least that's what I think about it.
I really, really want to talk about lagers with you because I imagine that's also what you want to talk about. I feel like there's, roads that we could go down hop wise, but I also feel like I don't want to waste too much time on it because you guys are a proper lager brewery. And I wonder, just sort of going back to the whole, what's Philly like thing, some of the conversations that you've had with drinkers, with customers who understand the word lager, but think of it as Yuengling, and how your beers differ from that, obviously. Are you having those conversations? Were those early on conversations that don't happen quite as much anymore of, hey, there's more to the world than America's oldest family-owned brewery?
Hey, there's nothing wrong with Yuengling.
I'm not knocking it. I'm just,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would argue with me with that one too. But yeah, we don't get a ton of that. I mean, we definitely have a couple of like what you would, sort of gateway beers. Like we do a light lager during football season. And certainly like there's no crazy big flavors in like the Czech 10 or beers like that. So I don't know that I've had that many of those conversations. Usually, people are always just talking bad about Yuengling, and I'm always kind of like, well, I don't know. They run a pretty good operation up there. Maybe Yuengling Lager is not my favorite beer in the world, but it's certainly a cool heritage brewery. So I always
they're efficient.
Steer towards something positive about it.
How difficult is it to make a light lager on a small scale? Because I often think about the large industrial players, and how they can scale it up. Is that a difficult beer to make on a small scale?
It's not any harder to make the individual batches of beer than it is to make anything else and have it come out decent. It's a little tricky because we don't brew it. I think if you were to go to like the big lager houses, like the light beer places, the big three, I believe most of them are fermenting the beer at like 16 Plato and then watering back with deaerated water before packaging. And we're putting like an 8.5 Plato lager in the tank. And sometimes, the yeast just doesn't want to build up that steam because it's out of food by the time it's done fermenting. It's not. We've had longer conditioning times than expected, for sure. So that's a little bit of a challenge. And I think if we were to go batch to batch consistency against, anybody who's making serious volumes of beer, they would be teasing us about, this being a little off and that being a little off. But we really prioritize just that the beer is a good experience to drink over, being exactly a certain number of IBUs or something like that, which I think is common in craft beer. I go for the enjoyment of it more than the specs of it in some regard. Obviously, you have to have your ABV, right there and your color and stuff. But I think if you were to pull, 4 batches, you would probably notice that one's maybe a little drier or one is a little more bitter or better head retention or whatever. So I don't think it's hard to make a clean light beer, but I think if you had a product that had to be exactly the same every time, that would be really hard at a small scale.
I love that you brought up enjoyment, because I think a lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, but now and again, the overthinking of a beer can be distracting to the overall act of trying to find enjoyment in a pint. You want your beers to be enjoyed and to have like an enjoyment factor behind it, I imagine. How do you approach that? How do you think about that when you're planning out a recipe and then hopefully an execution? The enjoyment factor.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm usually just trying to explore something that I'm interested in, which is usually, on the lower side of ABV, and having some historical significance for beer in general, and being like within a certain style. But for sure, like, I don't know, there are probably styles I wouldn't really want to brew because I don't necessarily love them. But when you have
what's an example of that?
So for me, that would be like rock beer. I'm not a big smoke beer fan.
Oh man,
but
you have come on to the wrong show, my friend.
It is one of those things though. Like I was fortunate enough to travel to Bamberg, like I think it was 2016, 2017. And, to sit at Schlenkerla and, it's not hard to drink 3 smoked Martzens when you're there.
No.
And you can kind of taste through the smoke. And it took being there and doing that to really teach me that. But, we run smoked beer 2-3 times a year here. And I'll always sit down and have 2 or 3 glasses of it at some point. But it's not usually my first choice of like go-to beer.
Okay. All right. So then back to what you do enjoy then, and thinking about low ABV and I don't know what else sort of like moves you as a brewer to find something that you can put into a glass that not only you're going to enjoy, but that you want people who tuck into a pint to experience.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's just there's just a little more to things than just coming up with a recipe and thinking, okay, it matches these specs or those specs. For me, it's more just wanting to, like, I like beer that has some complexity to it. I think some people would complain about our lagers that they probably have a little bit of sulfur from time to time and things like that. But to me, like, I just like a beer that has a lot of character. I think it's probably easier to make a squeaky clean beer, especially, if you're just, long diacetyl rest and carb stones and a DE filter, but it just sucks a lot of the life out of it. So that's what, for us, we're trying to make clean, naturally produced, as far as we don't use carb stones on the beer, on the lager beer. We don't use any heavy filtration. We will use a little bit of biofine clear here and there. But, just simple, but not too rustic is sort of what I'm always shooting for with our stuff.
Do you feel like that's giving your lagers a sense of place, a sense of identity as Human Robot?
I hope so. I know that, we've done a couple collabs, and one of the first collabs we did was with The Seed in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
And so we kind of went down there and did a mash that we do on a couple of our beers here, which is like basically a thin mash decoction. It's sort of like a turbid mash. And then, so we did that, and then we talked to them about how we do our fermentations. And speaking to Sean a couple of weeks later, he just was like, this does not taste like one of our beers at all. Like, this tastes like one of your beers. So that was kind of fun, because he was like, he kind of felt like he got some of the house character by doing it our way at his place. So we just kind of want to have people drink the beer, and it's hard with a lager because they're so ubiquitous. But we wanted just to have it stand out that little bit. always looking for those tiny improvements to on the hot side, or in fermentation or whatever.
I wonder from your perspective, because I think people are trying to put their own spin on beers or have something that is a signature taste. And I talk about it a lot with house culture when people are talking about mixed ferm beers, or occasionally there's the hop profiles or ways of hopping that particular brewers stand out among the rest. But with so many brewers out there these days, having a unique identity, is that does that strike you as important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially being on the brewing in the industry and knowing other brewers, there are certainly people around who it's like, oh man, this is definitely one of his beers, and I worked for Brian O'Reilly, who owns Mainstay and is the brewmaster there for about a year. And
when he was at Mainstay or back in the Sly Fox days?
That was at Mainstay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And his beers are just like ultra clean and have like a really bright dryness to them. And it's, you pull it. I just feel like I know his beer when I taste it. And that's something, my beer is pretty different from his. But it's something that I saw in him working with him that I really admired. Was like, wow, his beer is like just very dialed in, crisp and clean. And so, that puts a thought in your head where you're like, well, what's my thing going to be or whatever. So I don't know, working for somebody like him was a great experience in that way, because, it was all his voice. And you see that in brewing when you see brewers leave a place and go somewhere else. They might reinvent a little bit or change a few things, but it's always them.
Yeah, individual voice, I think, is so important. I mean, it can also be limiting, right? Because, a lot of people want one size fits all, or, if with craft still being a small part of the marketplace, if people are accustomed to a beer tasting a certain way at one place and then it's different someplace else, you might bring some fans along, you might alienate some people in the long run. How have you been trying to position your beers in the consumer conversation, to find the people who will understand, respect, like, and keep coming back for what you're doing?
I don't know. I mean, as far as like reaching out, I mean, from my perspective, it's, I'm just in the back of house, in the nerdery, making beers. Usually I'm bouncing the ideas off of the other partners, who are probably much more informed consumers than me. And, certain stuff just gets shot down real hard, and then other stuff that you don't expect, becomes something that everybody's very interested in. So I don't know. We just kind of try to do our own thing, and we've been really fortunate, more than anything else, that people have just consistently shown up for us and sort of shared our beers with people and things like that. I just think we've been really lucky in that regard. I don't know if there's been a lot of deliberate, sort of, aside from just sort of being excited about lager beer. I don't know what else, sort of gets people here besides just that they word of mouth or whatever it is,
Yeah. Where there's so much tradition to lagers, there is a lot of there's been a lot written, there's been a lot practiced. People understand different flavors and different styles. Where do you see paths for innovation in lagers, or at least, or different paths to try, maybe not innovation wise, but just process wise, ingredients wise? Where are you looking to mix it up and have some fun?
Well, so for us, the newest newest thing we've been getting into has been using some aged hops in the lagers. We've only really put out one beer so far with them, two actually. But the whole idea was born out of us. We produce wort for Fermentary Form.
Oh yeah.
And I've been producing wort for them. It's too long of a story to get into, but I used to make their wort since like 2016 when they started, 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And then when I came to Human Robot, it was like, hey, we're back, So he comes up here and we do the work for him. But basically, he always has a lot of aged hops around, European varieties, some UK varieties. And
I was hanging out with Ethan like 2 years ago, right before the world shut down, and I definitely saw those bags of hops that he had opened up all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stashed into corners, and yeah.
Exactly. So, when those hit the kettle, there's so much more going on than old cheesy hop. So we've just been intrigued by that and sort of just waited for the right time to make some beer with them. We did a beer with Ethan last year where we just did one of his recipes, but fermented it with lager yeast instead of sending it down to him to go into barrels. And, we were pretty happy with the beer. He was very happy with the beer. And so it just kind of said, well, there's something we got to work on when we have some tank space. So,
there is a noticeable difference between his recipe and the strains that he's normally using and the lager yeast.
Yeah, he's all mixed fermentation.
Yeah.
Definitely pushing some lactic acid. He's not always barrel aging, but it's always a mixed culture that he's using. So the beers were, wildly different. And it was fun. We got to pour them side by side at an event. So that was a pretty cool thing to do too.
Well, talk to me what the lager yeast did to those hops, like how it was wildly different. Like how did the yeast character change them side by side?
Probably the biggest thing would just be that the mixed firm, his beers finished very low, less than 1 Plato, I think most of the time. And, our beer, and I don't have notes in front of me, but it probably finished around 2.5 Plato. So, his beer was noticeably a lot drier. He's all bottle conditioned, or if it's draft, they're conditioned in the kegs too. And very high carbonation where we were, we're all spooned for carbonation. Sometimes we kreuzen for carbonation, but usually just pressure on the fermenter. So, we were like lower carb, and it was amazing. It was just kind of a clean lager, but it had just a different kind of funk to it. And if I recall, there was only one hop addition around 90 minutes, which that is I shouldn't give up his secrets, but that's what we usually do. Is just a single large hop addition very early. So that's what we did with that beer. And oddly enough, the foam on that beer was just insane. And I don't know if that had anything to do with the hops or not. It was also a single infusion lager, which is something we never do here, but it was his beer. So
yeah. When you were saying before that you were waiting for the right time to start messing around with aged hops and lagers, was that simply waiting for tank space to open up, or for the hops to get to a point where you felt they were ready to be used?
No, mostly like having a little bit of tank space, having a good pitch of yeast to split, because we have to kind of fit a beer like that in around the normal production schedule, and then also sort of making sure we had enough beer that if it just was a total flop, we could get rid of it without putting a hiccup in our production. Thankfully, everyone here is on board with doing stuff like that once in a while, and sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. So
So as you think about, well, what was the second batch that you did?
The second one that we did was a rye lager with a blend of, I think the hops were 2011 Hallertau Mittelfrüh that have been sitting open at Ethan's place since 2015 or 2016. So they had some age on them. And we split those with some fresh hops in a very low gravity sort of amber lager with rye. And I couldn't have been happier how that beer turned out.
How so?
It was just enjoyable. It kind of had a strange, farmhousey saison type of a feel to it.
Okay.
But it had that nice, the body that you get out of a naturally carved beer certainly is a little different than like a carved up, Carbstone carbonated beer. And it was just kind of a really raw, kind of a little bit of sulfur. We did a little colder fermentation than we do in our normal like German style stuff. So I don't know, I was just very happy with how it turned out. And then, so we're all standing around tasting it off the tank and very excited. And we had a Stitch Foss to throw on the bar the night before we released it. And we're all just kind of standing there like, are they going to love it or are they going to hate it? Because you just never know. And it was well received, thankfully, because I really, even though I was really happy with it, I just could see it not being enjoyed by everyone. And, we were fortunate. People really, really liked it, especially when it's a low ABV beer. I think this beer is 3.6%, maybe 3.4. So there's a lot going against a beer like that. It's a unique flavor, low alcohol. Thankfully, people came in here and drank it up,
So as you think about continuing on with this series and experimenting around with it, where's your mind been wandering to? Are there hops that you want to try? Are there, tweaks to the process?
Yeah. So we have a couple of different types of Styrian Goldings that we've had sitting in our, it's not our boiler room, but it's by the boiler.
Okay.
So we've got a couple bags of Styrian Goldings, some Styrian Bobek, some Styrian Solea, and a lot of Hallertau Mittelfrüh. Just kind of sitting there soaking it up. I think we're going to push low ABV and high color for the most part in these beers. It just seems to work. But we'll certainly do a couple pale beers and probably some standard, 12 Plato lager with them as well. And then the other side of that is based on the results that we're getting and what we think, we're already starting to think we're going to start working a portion of aged hops into a couple of the standard beers that we do. We don't want to make big changes overnight, but we are always trying to make incremental improvements in the beer. And some of the beers I think could benefit from it, but I just really haven't brewed with them enough to definitively say like, oh yeah, that's going to make a great change in this beer, Yeah.
But I mean, like what would be it? So if you're saying they could benefit from it, what do you hope the flavor or the aromas would be
sort of
in that? Like what would be the benefit from your palate standpoint?
From my standpoint, I just think you can get a little bit of like an earthier type of flavor, almost the way that some English beer kind of has like a mossy, like loamy background flavor to it. And that was what I really tasted in the Sui, the 3.5% aged hop lager. So we did use a portion of those hops in the next batch of our Zwickel beer. It's called Bergenstrasse. But it was a pretty small portion. We didn't want to make a noticeable change to the beer. But I think we're just going to try to work them in here and there where we think it's appropriate and just kind of compare to what our results had been before. It's not like we're going to just stop buying fresh hops and start throwing old stuff in all the time, but certainly with the Bergenstrasse, that beer specifically is one that I'm thinking about it on. So, and we're happy with the batch that it was used in, but I can't say that that's why,
Yeah. See, now you're making me thirsty to come down to Philly and to drink, but I'd have to figure out which of your 2 locations to go and visit first. I guess I'd probably try to go to both, but so you guys just opened up a second location.
We did. Yeah. We opened a place in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. It's called The House. It was a former location. There have been 2 breweries there before. And we bought it from Neshaminy Creek. We just had our opening this weekend. Things are great so far. So
who was in it before them?
Before Neshaminy, it was called Guild Hall.
Okay.
They were not open for very long. That was probably in 2015, 2016.
Okay. Yeah. I know the Neshaminy location, so I know I've been there. And reception's been good since you guys have opened.
Yeah, it's
just
been
a few days, but yeah.
A lot of so we're like 7 miles apart, and it's a straight shot up Broad Street. We've been spending way too much time in the van running beer back and forth. But
when you guys made the decision to have a second location, I'm always curious about breweries with multiple locations and how they try to make the places complementary or totally different from each other, or not franchise it out, but make it familiar from the second you walk in. When you were thinking about this second location, what did you want it to be in relation to your existing place, your first location?
Well, the main thing, without getting into too much like front office stuff, we lease our entire location on 5th Street in Philly. So for one, it was just an opportunity to own something, both the equipment and the building. Where here we rent everything except for the kegs and a couple of tanks that we bought. I mean, we rent the brew house. So
yeah.
Having something that's our own was one side of it. And the other side of it is just that, we get a lot of people who are from the area but don't want to come into the city. It's kind of unfamiliar to a lot of people to drive down to our 5th Street location and, parallel park on the street. And you don't get quite people. You only really get the adventurers down here. We're not like in central Philadelphia or anything like that. So being up there, it's kind of a place where some of the people from the suburbs have easier access to us. And then it also, there's a brew house there, and I wouldn't say we need capacity strictly in barrels, but to keep a decent variety of beers on, it's nice to have another brew house to just go knock something out on and have some draft beer.
And then run them up and down Broad Street.
Yeah.
So if somebody's been to your first location though, and they haven't been to the new spot yet, are there going to be noticeable differences, or is it going to feel like human robot to them when they walk in?
Certainly there's some differences. We have a different food partner up there. So on 5th Street, we have Poe's Sandwich Joint. He does, like family recipe Italian hoagies and stuff like that. Like a banh mi hoagie. So we have Poe's here, and he's got his own thing going on, and it's just a great relationship for us. His food's great, and he gets a lot of takeout business here, and it's a good deal for both of us that we don't have to run a kitchen. So we like that model. For this, we partnered with World Fair Hospitality. We knew the owners from previous events that we had done. So they're doing like a, German German-ish menu with a lot of American stuff on it. But it's kind of the same deal up there as it is here. We don't really have like servers and a full wait staff. You kind of get your drinks at the bar, you order your food from the kitchen, and they send it out. So it's not like a full service restaurant. But up there it's a large building, a lot of seating, a lot of natural light. It's a really nice space. Not that our Philly location isn't, but it's small. And we probably will have more beers on tap in Jenkintown as well. We kind of cobbled together the draft system out of some of the stuff that was already there and ended up with a lot of beer lines. So if we have a lot of draft, we'll be pouring more variety up there probably.
Gotcha. That makes sense. On the show for, I don't know how long now, I've been asking folks as we start to wind down, I've been leading with the premise of my wife and I were rewatching The Good Place last year. And there's this whole concept on the show of being able to walk through a green door and being anywhere at any point in history with anybody that you would want to be with. And if such technology existed on this plane of existence and you could finish this conversation and walk through a green door and be in any pub or any brewery, anywhere with anybody that you wanted, where would you go? Who would you be with? What would you want to drink?
If I could go anywhere, I would want to go to the Abbey at Orval with my partner Moira. That would be, my happy place. Certainly never been.
Gotta get the vert. Yeah.
Beer related, that it would be that.
That's a great answer. That's perfect.
That's probably my number one beer, as much as I love lager, and I probably only have 5 or 6 Orvals a year, but man, that beer is just the mountaintop for me.
Yeah. If you could only have one of your beers for a year,
I would probably
what would you pick?
The Czech 10, the 10 Czech lager. That's pretty much how my life is now anyway. That's the beer. But yeah, that beer is right up my alley, and you can have a couple and still be pretty functional, which is nice too.
I dig it. Andrew, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing insights on what's happening. And I'm really curious to keep following this Age Hops in your lager adventure. So hope to be down and taste them in person and chat with you in person soon.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
What is on your beer bucket list, and what do you hope to have in your glass soon enough? Let me know. You can email me. It's John Holl, JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can get with me on Twitter at John_Holl. A reminder to check out beeredge.com for our This Week in Rauk Beer and Defend Pilsner merch. And you can follow along on social media at The Beer Edge. And of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, we're at TW Rauk Beer. We're able to bring you the show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you would like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to sponsor@beeredge.com. And also be sure to check out NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz, or you can find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZHops Ltd to learn more. As always, a reminder to check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes on every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.